Today's unpopular opinion is convicts in life sentence should be given an option to choose euthanasia. If someone has been given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after a few years they should be given the option of euthanasia. I think it's particularly cruel and pointless keeping someone locked up in a small cell for the rest of their lives. If you do not want to reintroduce someone back into society, give them an option to end their suffering. Also, it's a huge burden on taxpayers. Average prisoner costs the country $30,000 a year. Why not give these prisoners an option to end their suffering when there is no light at the end of the tunnel and we use those funds to better society? Example, keeping someone in prison for 30 years would cost the taxpayer $5 million. Think about that. We could pay for 100 kids' college tuition with that. We are spending $5 million of taxpayer money to make someone suffer. Nobody wins. Funny, defense attorneys and their clients do everything possible to take the death penalty off the table, so life in prison is preferred over death. Some would take advantage of euthanasia, but most would not. They can take college courses in prison, get married, enjoy conjugal visits, work out, watch TV, etc. Also, many who are let out of prison reoffend within a matter of weeks, so going back to prison must not be too scary. Where is the justice for the victims of the crimes committed by the person who is termed to life in prison if you allow them to be euthanized? The whole point of them doing their entire life in a cell is both punishment and some form of justice for the victims and family of the victim. Imagine someone murders your child. They get found guilty, life in prison with parole absolutely denied. 1 year later, they are euthanized. Essentially, they've had 1 year of punishment for murdering your child, and then they are put out their misery. Or they can be locked up at 20 years old for the murder of your child and spend the next 60 to 70 years having 23 hours a day in a small cell, which will destroy them year after year. I get what you're saying. You want this person to suffer as punishment. Let's say we meet halfway, and if they do choose to die, we do it in a painful way. I agree there needs to be justice. Think of it this way. Would these criminals have committed suicide if they were not in prison? Probably not. If they choose euthanasia now, that is because of the circumstances. They are in a way paying the ultimate price for their crime, their life. This is the same reasoning why death penalty is reserved for the worst offenders. Death penalty is above life in prison because it is the highest punishment. I don't see death as a punishment though, it's a way out. If I murder someone and get life without parole and deemed to spend the rest of my life in a 10-foot by 10-foot cell for 23 hours per day until the day I die, I would absolutely prefer to die than live this sentence until natural death occurs. If I know full well I'm never getting out, what's the point in being alive just to drag out my inevitable death by 60 years until natural causes takes me when I could just choose to be put to death and save 60 years of misery? Why is the death penalty okay then but suicide not? Not really, because that kind of gives them the easy way out. They deserve life sentence for their crimes most of the time unless they are wrongfully convicted. But the ones that do deserve it would often rather have death to escape it, but they don't even deserve death because then they have freedom from the pain that their actions caused. I think that it is a just punishment. At least that is one way to look at it. I don't know if I'm being too cruel, but I think there are some really bad people out there who do not deserve death penalty because that would be too kind of fate for them. This isn't consistent with the goal of rehabilitation. Sometimes they can get a pardon or a reduced sentence for good behavior, so giving them the option to end it isn't really giving them that chance to rehabilitate and subsequently re-enter society. It's expensive, but just because you commit crimes doesn't disqualify you from help from the state, considering that at one point they themselves have once paid taxes in one way or another or contributed to the well-being of society. If you are worried about money being wasted on imprisonment, the vast majority goes into mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug possession convictions. That's the first step. That's the point of the life sentence. Death would be the easy way out because you just stop existing. The same problem exists with the death penalty. Sure, you live your last year or couple months knowing you will die, but when you do die, everything ends, you stop suffering. In my opinion, scumbags like rapists, murderers, etc. shouldn't get to die early. I could go on a spree and murder 50 kids than just have the state execute me on my own terms. Where's the justice for the victims and their families? Clearly, life doesn't matter to me, so death isn't a punishment, it's an escape. Meanwhile, those 50 families are completely destroyed. Children are dead, and because the state let me choose a needle, there's nothing that can even bring an ounce of closure and justice to the victims. Or I can be forced to spend the next 40 to 60 years locked in a cage of misery and suffering, forced to face what I did every day, knowing the world will never take me back. I'll die behind bars for what I did if the other prisoners don't murder or rape me to death first. It doesn't fix what I did, but at least the law is exacting vengeance for the victims and their families. Fighting pits and chariot races. That's why prisoners must work. You and the commenters make a good point. This is difficult, and oftentimes in life there is no way to please everyone. You just got to do whatever is most logical. And I think it's fair to give the prisoners that particular choice. But there's so many other things to consider too. Then the main punishment is no longer effective. They can always kill themselves if they wish. Dude, even people being executed don't get euthanized, they get a painful death. Not in modern times though. Most modern executions are now being done with injections. Almost no one uses electric chair or hanging. The only problem is the death penalty costs more than life sentences. I really think the revenge portion of American justice needs to be set aside. We should know by now revenge does not make you happy and does not serve any justice.